Now, let's begin the symposium, a conversation with Nobel Laureate Paul Milgrom. First, Professor Makoto Kasuya, Dean of the Graduate School of Economics, the University of Tokyo, will deliver opening remarks. Professor Kasuya, please.
Today, I'm very pleased to welcome Professor Milgrom to this conference on behalf of the Graduate School of Economics at the University of Tokyo. At our school, a significant body of research in game theory, auction theory, and market design has been conducted by distinguished scholars such as Professor Kandori, Professor Matsushima, and Professor Kojima. I regret that I do not have enough time to name all the distinguished professors individually. We are also home to the University of Tokyo Market Design Center. These scholars have been deeply influenced by the work of Nobel Laureate Professor Milgrom and have had the opportunity to collaborate with him in various research endeavors. Although I am a business historian and do not specialize in this field, I have been deeply impressed by Professor Milgrom's contributions, particularly through his books such as Economics, Organization and Management, Putting Auction Theory to Work, and Discovering Prices. I hope today's conference will further promote academic exchange and inspire further research among all of us. I very much look forward to Professor Milgrom's presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, Professor Fuhito Kojima will briefly introduce the University of Tokyo Market Design Center and ERATO Kojima Market Design Project. Professor Kojima is a world-leading researcher in market design and is the director of the University of Tokyo Market Design Center. He's also the research director of ERATO Kojima Market Design Project. And prior to joining UTokyo, he was a professor at Stanford University, where he was both a colleague and a research collaborator of Professor Milgrom. Professor Kojima, please.
Thank you so much. Okay, I know that, well, everybody is dying to hear Paul Milgrom talking about his own research, but just give me a second. So to introduce the overarching topic of today, okay? So first, so the Professor Milgrom and a lot of us here specialize in a branch of economics under the fields called market design. So what is market design? Okay, so here's a kind of one slide picture of it, okay? So economics, well, especially theory, microeconomic theory and game theory, has been studying the following question. So given the rule of society, let's say the legal framework or a rule of the game, how people behave in that kind of situation, and then that leads we became more and more able to predict what happened in the given society, okay, given the rule under the given rule of the society, and that will predict what happens in the society and what kind of outcome we'll realize. So now in the market design, we ask the kind of the opposite question, which is, well, we start with the desirable outcome of the society, which we would like to achieve. And then the question is how to design a social institutions, okay, such that under that society institution, the desired outcome will realize, okay? So, which is this direction, okay? Okay, so me and many others here are all very much inspired by this this agenda of market design. So, well, we were so inspired by works by lots of pioneers, including Professor Milgrom. So inspired that we actually made two institutions here in University of Tokyo. So one is the Market Design Center of the University of Tokyo, so UTMD. So we are a research center in the University of Tokyo, studying the market design research and also putting the insights from research in market design into practice. Okay. More recently, we established the ERATO market design group. So this is ERATO is a big program of the JST, the Japan Science and Technology Agency. So we and the JST collaborated to create this group, and we are running it from beginning last year. Okay. All right. So let me just briefly show what we have been working on. So as you can see here, the market design can analyze and help organize a lot of social institutions, ranging from labor market, environmental mechanism design, education, and healthcare, for example. We have those kind of projects running now. So we will talk a bit, touch on some of the issues here today. So, for example, in one of the projects, Shunya Noda here in our group and others worked on, they considered the auction design related to the recycling of PET bottles. Okay, the farms need to actually get the material and then turn the recycled material into the bottle again. Okay, and the auction design naturally came into the came into the scope of the market design here in the context of environmental market design. So that's a kind of one of many fields that Professor Milgrom contributed. So we are very happy to have Professor Milgrom talk about his contributions. But before that, let me just say one more thing. So this one of the interesting aspects of market design is that it's a very interdisciplinary field. So this is the as you can see in this list in our ERATO market design project, we collaborate across fields. There are microeconomic theorists like myself and Michi, who will talk soon. But also empirical economists, as well as discrete mathematicians and computer scientists. Okay, so I also hope that we can touch on this interdisciplinary aspects of market design today. Okay, on that note, I know that I promised I will not steal too much time from the main interesting part. Okay, so let me just finish now and pass the microphone to Michi.
Okay, so let me introduce the distinguished guest today, Professor Paul Milgrom, to you. And let me start with a brief bio of Professor Milgrom. So he studied at the Graduate School of Business for his PhD degree and received his degree in 1979 under the advice of Bob Wilson. And after that, he taught at Northwestern University and Yale University, and finally he came to Stanford and became professor in 1987. And since then, he has been a professor there. Okay, so Paul is a leading researcher in the revolutionary change in economics and economic theory. So economic theory used to talk about demand and supply. So economic theory or economics in general used to be all about demand and supply. So if you have a well-functioning market with large number of buyers and sellers, things are determined by demand and supply. So traditionally, economics used to look at what's happening in those perfectly competitive market. But around late 1970s and early 1980s, the focus was shifted from the analysis of perfectly competitive market to more fundamental analysis of strategic thinking in terms of game theory. So this was really a revolutionary change, and Paul was one of the leading scholars to make this revolution possible. And in particular, he provided lots of insightful analysis of information. So in economic and social problems, different people have different pieces of information and their incentives. And in particular, he tried to derive optimal way of providing incentives to economic agents so that outcome is really good. And his works have many applications, including business strategies, contracts, and the design of organizations and markets. Okay? So for this last part, he won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2020. So here's a picture, along with his graduate advisor, Bob Wilson. And the reason for this Nobel Prize is, okay, so it's for improvements to auction theory and inventions of new auction formats. Okay, so let me just stop my introduction and let's move on to the main part.
Thank you very much. And now let's begin the panel discussion. And please welcome Professor Paul Milgrom. Please join us on the stage.
Thank you, by the way, for those wonderful introductions. It's true that Fuhito was my close colleague at Stanford. We miss you very much there, Fuhito. We had a great time while you were there. And Michihiro, you were my first PhD student at Stanford.
Yeah, that's right.
Right at the beginning when I first arrived. So remember, no sooner did I get there, you walked in the door of my office and introduced yourself, and off we went. So that was great.
Yeah,
good to see you
time
again.
flies, a long time ago. Thank you. So this is a rare opportunity for you to listen to Paul about his personal views and perspectives on the research and the practical applications of market design. So let me start with two new auction formats Paul designed, and this is one of the reasons for his Nobel Prize. And, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going backward. So let me start with the FCC Spectrum auction in 1994. And this is one of the first Spectrum auction. And in early 90s, people started to use mobile phones. So mobile phone operators or mobile phone companies need to use specific radio spectrum bands that was owned by a nation. And it should be allocated to potential mobile phone operators. So that was the nature of this auction. And it was conducted by FCC. So in the end, 10 spectrum bands were sold. According to a new auction format, which is called simultaneous multiple round auctions, SMRA. And this format was invented by Paul and Bob, right? And subsequently, versions of this have been widely used in other spectrum auction. So in the end, 29 bidders, so there were 29 potential buyers, and 6 of them won some spectrums. And revenue is about $600 million. So it's a substantial amount. Okay, so let's ask let us ask some questions about this auction. Fuhito, you have the first question.
Yeah, so my first question would be, well, actually, so why were you selected to design this auction?
Why were we selected? Well, we weren't selected to design the auction is the answer. And that is auction one that you've posted there. This was the very first auction, but this was really just a test run of the big auction.
I see.
Auction 4, as it was called by the FCC, was going to be the giant auction, which was, I don't know, $7 billion. It was much bigger. And,
I see.
And what had happened is that the Federal Communications Commission was responsible for organizing this auction, which had been newly authorized by law in the United States. And they didn't have a clue how to do it. And so they made up a bunch of stuff in an administrative document called a Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. And they cited the auction theory literature, including some of my work. And then a bunch of the telephone companies who wanted to buy spectrum were very curious about what impact it would have on them. This was really a big deal for them. And so they started calling the professors whose names were listed in the footnotes of the government's. And so I got called by Pacific Bell, and they asked me to make an alternative proposal to the Federal Communications Commission. Bob Wilson and I did that. Lots of other economists also had proposals. Ours wasn't the only one, but the Federal Communications Commission liked ours the best. And this was a test run. This was supposed to be a really easy case that it was supposed to be much lower stakes than the big auction.
Oh, I see. So this is a part of the main auction. And so you had 4 auctions and 5 auctions. This is auction number 1, right? Do you recall how many?
There have been more than 100 already.
But in around 1994?
This was auction 1. This was the very first one that you've put up there now. And again, that was run as auction number 1 because nobody expected that much money. They were expecting revenue that was under $100 million. They wanted to see if it worked. We had proposed something that had never been tried, and they didn't want to try a brand new auction for the first time in the main auction that they were planning. So this was considered an experiment.
I see.
It was successful, and then they went on and ran the big auction.
So do you remember when the second one was conducted? So sequel to this pilot?
Yeah, so there was some little ones. The auction 4 started, so this was, this auction I believe was in the summer of 1994, this one. And auction 4 began in December that year, which was the big one.
In the same year, I see.
6 months later, yeah.
And how many spectrum bands were sold in the auction 4? Do you remember, roughly speaking?
So these were national bands. The licenses that were sold in the big one were approximately 1,000 licenses.
Oh, really?
They involve, the licenses in this auction. This was for pagers, which was thought to be not a very valuable technology, and a paging license would let you use that frequency across the entire country. In auction 4, the licenses were by frequency and region, and there were the reason there were so many licenses, they chopped the United States up. Well, there were 734 cellular markets in the United States at the time, and God knows, they broke it up in different ways that the geographic divisions added a lot of complexity.
So in each geographic division, they conducted different auctions, one focus or nationwide?
It was one auction for more than 1,000, more than 1,000 licenses in one auction,
And how many potential buyers participated? Do you remember?
I think it was on the order of 100.
100, I see.
And and many dozens of winners of different parts of the spectrum. So it was
I see.
quite a bit larger than.
Okay, so the,
Yes.
the actual auction is more impressive than this slide might suggest. So let me ask you the nature of this simultaneous round multiple auction. So in the simplest case, for auction one, you had 10 spectrum bands. So one very crude way of conducting auction is selling them one by one, starting from band one, moving on to two, by using usual auction format. Okay, so what was wrong with this naive approach?
So it's, something like that would have been okay for auction one. Let me describe the advantages generally, and they have some advantage in auction one too, but the really big advantage was later in the target auction. What was going on is the bidders had to decide which licenses to bid for to form their business plans, and there were many combinations possible. And some of the licenses were substitutes for one another. That is, they were different frequencies covering more or less the same geographic areas. And some of them were complements. That is, if you wanted to, if your business plan involved setting up a national license, you might consider that you needed to buy coverage in many areas in order for your business plan to work. And so there were licenses were substitutes and complements, and there were many that you could buy. And we, with the primitive economic theory that we had available at the time, we're thinking, well, in order to make informed decisions, bidders should have some idea of what the prices of all the licenses are going to be. And if we could set up an auction where all the prices were being determined simultaneously, bidders would be better informed, and they could make their choices having some idea of the prices. We know that if they knew prices exactly and we have market clearing, then the traditional first welfare theorem would apply. The result would be efficient. But here the notion was that they would have approximate information at the time they were making their final bids. They would be affecting the prices, but they wouldn't be doing so blindly.
I see. So rather than selling items one by one, all items are sold simultaneously. That's one important point.
Yes.
And also, it's about it's the ascending multiple round auction. And could you briefly describe how it works? So it starts with 10 licenses. So initially they have very low prices.
Yes.
And automatically price goes up, or bidders try to increase the bid by themselves.
The bidders increased by themselves in this auction, and these licenses, these bands in this auction one were perfect substitutes. Or approximately perfect substitutes. So there was arbitrage here, and people would bid on whichever bands were cheapest. And we ended up in the end at that auction where basically all the licenses sold for the same price. We could have done this in a simpler way, but we got the arbitrage worked. Bidders were able to see which licenses were cheapest and bid for those, and we got in auction one we ended up with uniform prices. Nothing like that in auction four. By the time we got to auction four, the licenses to deliver telephone service to Los Angeles are much more valuable than to serve Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Dallas, Texas, and bands had different frequencies and they had different coverage areas, and they all had unique prices. But the bidders were nevertheless were able to account for the whole vector of prices in deciding what to bid for.
Oh, I see. So auction one was relatively simple, and auction four was really big. So maybe it takes a long time to finish auction four. Do you remember how long it took for auction two? Within a day or within a few days, or?
Oh no, it was a few months.
Few months. Oh, really?
There were. We're talking about a $7 billion auction in which bidders are deciding on many combinations. This was well worth spending. The bidders thought it was well worth spending the time to think carefully. When you're deciding on a business plan and you decide something is too expensive and you need a new plan, and the question is it worth $1 billion? You don't make that decision in 10 minutes, right? That's
That's interesting.
these were big, big decisions. Yeah.
Oh, I see. So in theory, potential buyers are supposed to know the value of each combination of spectrum. But in practice, deciding how much this combination was to me as a buyer, it takes a long time. And this evaluation takes time. And that's one reason why auction for took a long time. That's very interesting.
It's one reason. Remember, if you have 1,000 licenses, you have 2 to the power 1,000 combinations.
Right, yeah.
Nobody in their right mind thinks that bidders can already know at the beginning of the auction what their values are for all possible combinations. Actually, there were additional complications beyond that, but I think I'll leave it there. There were way too many combinations for bidders to.
Yeah.
I know that you had asked me once before about why we didn't think about using a Vickrey-Clark-Groves mechanism, and it's the same answer, right? The Vickrey-Clark-Grove mechanisms, you have to specify your value for every possible outcome, and for each bidder, there's 2 to the 1,000 possible outcomes. It's just not something within the realm of possibility.
Yeah, so you have...
Let me answer the next question. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so there is an auction method or auction format called the BCG auction. Yeah. And it first the mechanism asks each potential buyer, what's the value of each combination of spectrum bands? If you have a combination of spectrum band A, B, and C, what is your value? And how about combination B and D and so on? There are so many combinations, but you have to, report the values of all subsets. So that's the input. And then BCG auction sort of calculate personalized price. Price depends, so all potential buyers face different kinds of prices, and the price is not attached to each spectrum bands, but the price is attached to the combination of spectrum bands, and it's personalized. And this mechanism has a remarkable property. The outcome is efficient. So the goods are allocated to buyers who value them most. And in reporting their values, there is no room for strategic manipulation. So saying the true value is always optimal. And this is the only mechanism which satisfies those properties. And one of the remarkable design by Paul Milgrom was not to use this optimal design. And one reason is, reporting those values for all combination and calculating the efficient allocation is computationally infeasible. And that's
2 reasons, and and the second reason will come up again later if when we talk about another auction.
Oh, I see.
Not only is it impossible to report these things, but even if you did report them, the computations are what the computer scientists call NP-hard, the determining the prices. And we had done later on when we talk about other auctions, we did some experiments with VCG auctions for other applications, and the computations are very hard. We got nonsense out of we were using. We got nonsense attempting to compute prices using the VCG formulas. So it's both hard to report and hard to compute with.
Oh, I see.
That kind of like makes us feel very sad because you can't use really like theoretically nice auction, right? But when you actually designed this auction, did you still like use the insights from the auction theory in some ways, or it's more like you should do it in a very different manner?
So we used some insights from game theory. I would say the first auction didn't have a lot of auction theory in it. The first auction had some standard economics in it. We thought that we knew that if people could forecast prices perfectly, and act as price takers. We could get an efficient outcome. And we wanted to get as close to that as possible by having a practical mechanism to make lots of price information available before the final bids were made. Now, there were, this doesn't work perfectly because an ascending process doesn't always lead to market clearing prices. We know that that works when items are substitutes, but not in general when they're complements. And so we looked at some of the problems, some of the game theory that was associated with that. What would bidders do that might be problematic? And we designed this auction with some unusual rules, what were called the Milgrom-Wilson activity rules, that became the basis. All these auctions have activity rules now, that were designed to prevent some of the kind of strategizing that would have ruined the auction outcome and might have been attractive to bidders. So we did do some game theoretic analysis, but the auction theory analysis we started working on later as these things were refined and as we got into the incentive auction, which we'll probably talk about later, I guess.
Okay, so let's move on. Let's move on to the next more ambitious auction. That's the so-called incentive auction, first conducted in 2017. Okay, so around that time, new TV broadcasting technology was invented, digital broadcasting or something. So UHF channels were reduced, and therefore radio spectrum bands used to use to broadcast UHF TV programs no longer necessary, and it should be reallocated to, for example, mobile phone company. So it's a very ambitious auction. So it buys up spectrum bands from TV stations, and it tried to sell those things to potential mobile phone operators. Okay, so that's the nature of this incentive auction. So it has two parts. So buying part, which is called reverse auction, and the selling part, which is called the forward auction. So for reverse auction, more than nearly 3,000 spectrum bands were bought from 175 TV stations. And okay, and the cost was about $10 billion. So that's the buying part. The selling part is called the forward auction, and 2,776 spectrum bands were sold and to 50 bidders. And the revenue is 19 billion. So this revenue is much larger than the cost paid. So this was a more ambitious auction. Okay. So first question is a similar one to the previous one of the previous ones. How did you get involved in designing this auction? Is it you and Ilya and who else?
Yeah, right, it was a team. I was called to the FCC when this was announced. The problem. Well, can I correct some of your history first? Let me start by correcting the history. So the digital transformation had happened earlier. What was going on here was that after the introduction of the iPhone and now the Android and other mobile devices, the demand for wireless data just skyrocketed, and there wasn't enough spectrum for it. Meanwhile, on the television side, people, at least I don't know how you guys watch your television here, but in the US, in the early days, people used to watch over-the-air broadcast from TV stations, and now they had cable, they had satellite, they watched shows over the internet, and the value of over-the-air broadcast had fallen. And so the FCC and Congress agreed, decided that it would be a good idea if we could move some of the spectrum that was used for television broadcast and make it available for mobile broadband. But the broadcasters had rights and they had to be bought out. And so the question was how to do that, how much spectrum to move, how to pack the remaining broadcasters into the reduced amount of spectrum that was available for them. And nobody had a clue how to do this. And I had a good reputation at this time at the FCC, so they approached me and said, "Could you do it?" And I said, "No, but I could put together a team." And the team was a wonderful team. You're right. Ilya Segal was on the team. John Levin, who's now the president of Stanford University, was on the team. Kevin Leighton Brown, who's a brilliant computer scientist at the University of British Columbia, was on the team. These are just the professors. We had some junior people supporting us too. And Larry Azabal, who had a software company, was another member of the team. And we worked out the whole plan. We were responsible for designing and building they wanted something that was doable, that, it had to be something we could finish in a reasonable amount of time, that had to have no unjust enrichment, that had to be as efficient as possible, that had to discourage fancy strategies, and we had to provide the software to do it. And the calculations here are NP hard. So one of the first things that we did was try the Vickrey Clark Groves auction to see, well, over the years, could we compute these things? And this is where the Vickrey Clark Grove auction has these wonderful theoretical properties, and it's completely impractical even for stations that you had a TV station that just had one station, buy or not. So value reporting wasn't hard, but computing prices was, we would let the best, fast computers running the most modern software run for weeks, and then we would take and they hadn't proved optimality yet. These are mixed integer programs, large mixed integer programs. There were 2.7 million constraints on the assignment of TV stations to channels. You had to make sure that when you moved, when we cleared some TV stations from spectrum and moved the others to a smaller set of channels, that there was no pairs that interfered with each other on any of the channels. And there were 2.7 million constraints in that problem. And it was an NP hard problem, so it was totally intractable. I've sort of lost track of what the question was here, but
You're already in the middle. You're already answering much of our prepared question, but let me still ask. So in this big auction, so what is the main challenges you faced, and how did you cope with it? Can you describe it?
Yeah, there are three. As I see it today, there are three kinds of challenges. I don't think I would have seen it this way at the beginning, but there are as I see it today now. And think back on what we did, there were three kinds of challenges. The first one was conceptual. That is, we were trying to decide, what was being bought and sold. And what we were doing was taking one kind of right, which was the right to broadcast TV signals, and buy those and manufacture another kind of right, which was mobile data. And I could talk to you about that at some length, but those are very different things. They have different interference characteristics. They involve different geographic areas. There's a lot of engineering involved in converting the one to the other. The second was purely technical. Even if we had information, just solving these NP hard problems was, we couldn't guarantee optimality. So we had an auction that was not based on optimization. It was based on what we would call a heuristic that was designed to get very good outcomes, but understanding that the computations were hard, and that involved close collaboration with computer scientists, especially Kevin Leighton Brown's work was brilliant in this. So there was that. And then third, and this is something we don't often talk about, but this was really complicated, and most of the bidders were small businessmen. You know, your grandfather founded a television station in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1958, you know, and it's a station that's in the family showing, you know, broadcasting over the air, I don't know, you know, who knows what they're broadcasting, but they're the relatively small TV stations. And they had to participate in an auction to sell where there was 2.7 million constraints governing the thing. And we had to make it simple. So one of the biggest challenges in the whole thing was simplicity. It had to be that those guys, when they participated, were not confused, that they understood what they were doing, and that they were satisfied with the outcome. And we were willing to give up some optimality, because if the people are confused and don't participate, the whole auction fails. We needed them to participate. We needed them to be happy, because this is a political process too. We needed them to feel like they knew what they were doing. And we designed an auction that would make all of that possible.
Okay, so let me ask you the basic nature of this incentive auction. So did you conduct reverse auction first and then forward auction, or did you conduct them simultaneously?
So it's neither of the above. So the concept was this: the way we had to decide how much spectrum we were going to clear. So we needed to make sure that the revenues from the forward auction were sufficient to pay the costs of the reverse auction. And the way the process worked is we first decided on an aggressive target how much spectrum we'd like to clear. It was 126 megahertz of spectrum, which was too much. It was a lot. And then we ran the reverse auction and said, what would it cost to buy this spectrum? And then we ran the forward auction second and said, how much revenue do we generate? And it would have cost, to buy 126 megahertz of spectrum would have cost $80 billion, and we would have gotten revenue of $15 billion in the forward auction, and it was nowhere near satisfying. But the way the auction was designed is prices in the reverse auction were declining, and prices in the forward auction were rising. And so after the failure of what's called stage one, which we didn't call it a failure, we called it after stage one, when the revenues were not sufficient to cover the costs, we reduced the clearing target. And that meant that we weren't going to buy as many, so we could continue to reduce prices and get competition in the reverse auction. And since we were selling fewer licenses, prices rose in the forward auction. And we went through 4 rounds of that before, in the 4th round, with 70 megahertz of spectrum targeted for clearing, we finally had this situation where instead of costing $80 billion, it was only costing $10 billion. And instead of generating only $15 billion, it was generating $20 billion. And that was the end of the auction. So it was a back and forth with changing targets.
I see. So as I see, if I am right, I just copied this from FCC homepage. Reverse auction bought 2,912 bands, and out of those, a subset of those, 2,776 were sold. So
no, they're not the same thing. This was.
Oh, I see.
This is a manufacturing process. We are buying television broadcast rights, and we are selling mobile broadband or wireless broadband rights.
I see.
And so what you're calling bands,
different things.
They're different things. Right?
I see. So there was no leftover.
No.
In the end. Oh, I see. Oh, I see. Oh, good. Okay. So when they approached you and you assembled collaborators, and how much time did you have until submitting final auction proposal? Did you have something like 2 years, 1 year, or a few months?
No. The main proposal went in, the auction was eventually run 5 years after I was hired. But that was a period during which, by 2 years out, less than 2 years out, we had the basic design down in place. But there were algorithms to work out to solve these very hard problems. There was software to be coded, there was testing. And there was also, it turned out there were many other steps that I haven't even, just to give you an idea, before we began any of before we had these constraints, I needed to know whether I could put you, Michi, and you, Fuhito, both on channel 27 without creating interference. So there was a study where we went out and took radio signals, not we, but the team went out and took radio signals and found the strength of the signals. And the United States was pixelated into these little 1 kilometer square pixels. We estimated the signal strength at the center of each pixel, determined where there would be radio interference. All that had to be done. And then there were legal steps to involved. So the whole process took 5 years.
I see. Okay. So at the very beginning, did you have any idea that final product is something like this? Or what was your first starting point of designing things?
We didn't even know that we were going to be buying the bands from individual stations. We started out at the beginning, discussing, well, maybe what we should do is buy interference rights. If I would say, you, Michihiro, have a television station, how much would you charge me to interfere with 10% of your coverage? There were what we were buying, what we were selling, how much, how we would decide how many things to buy and sell. It was all brand new. We invented all of this stuff. It was really, we spent years brainstorming about how to do this. And then it had to be practical. Had to be something that we ourselves could prepare the software for on the team, that we had the algorithms for, and then it had to meet all this long list of requirements that I began to describe to you. They had to be finished in according to deadlines that they satisfy, had to avoid unjust enrichment. It was the mechanism for buyers was strategy proof, like BCG is, but without the optimization. Had to, generate good efficiency, but yet satisfy the revenue demands. So it was a lot.
So it looks like a lot of things. There are a lot of things that you and your team need to consider. So let me just pick up on just one of them. So you said you put a lot of effort to make the design really sort of simple for the participants. And sometimes economists seem to struggle with how to even tackle this kind of problem, right? So I wonder how did you approach this problem to make the auction simple for the participants, easy and simple?
Yeah, and I don't know if Shengwu is here today. So at the time we were working on this, I had a group at Stanford. My graduate students were working with me, and one of them who's here in Tokyo today, but I guess he's not out there in the audience today, was Shengwu Li, who described at some point, we wanted a process that made it as clear as possible to the bidders what to do. And Shengwu invented this notion of obvious strategy proofness based on what we were doing, because apparently at some point I had said, not only is this thing going to be strategy proof, it's going to be obvious to the bidders that it's strategy proof. And that's where Shengwu picked up this name from. So we were really trying to make it simple so that it would be obvious. And if you've studied Shengwu's work, you know exactly what that means. But let me just describe it to the audience here. So suppose one of you you're one of these little guys who has a television station in your family that's worth $10 million to the station. And the way the auction looks to you is the auction opens and the government says, if I offered you $100 million, would you sell your station? And you can say yes or no. And if you say no, that's fine, the auction's over for you and you go home. But if you say yes, then the government goes around and says, well, I got more offers than I needed. How about, would you take $80 million for your station? And, you know, if you say no, and again, so you're just asked a bunch of yes or no questions. You got a station that's worth $10 million, and the government is potentially offering you 90 or 80 or $50 million. It's just obvious that you should say yes, because you might get that. If you say no, you get nothing. So, and you don't have to say yes to the next offer. So it's obviously strategy proof, and that's how it looks. That's how our system looked to the sellers. But behind the scenes, we're solving, you know, we're saying we got 2.7 million constraints, and if you don't sell me your station, if you say no, I've got to find a channel to put you on. Is there any way to do that? And that involves solving these hard problems. And all of that's done under the hood. We kept it, you know, invisible to the participants. So that was, you know, that was the general structure from their point of view.
So for those of you who took my class for game theory this semester, so I guess one analogy would be the second price auction and the English auction. So English auction, so you say yes or no, so it's kind of obvious that it's strategy proof. So that seems like a really good idea.
Yeah, the English auction is also obviously strategy proof if you have one item that you're buying, yeah.
Another question. So oftentimes when people design new auction formats or matching method, they test whether this works or not by conducting lab experiment. Did you do that for incentive auction?
We didn't do it for the incentive auction, no. We didn't do it for the incentive auction.
Any reason for that?
You know,
but you were confident that it's going to work fine.
Yeah, I was confident that part would work. So remember, the reason that you run lab experiments is to test how people will behave. Right. And this isn't, from the standpoint of an individual, this isn't that novel. It looks like an English auction to you. So it didn't really seem that the human behavior was the challenge. There were technical challenges, and we spent a lot of time on the technical challenges. And, you know, there were other implementation challenges, which we haven't, you know, I've simplified for this may sound complicated, but believe me, there were a lot of other technical challenges and that we had to deal with. And we thought that those were the things that required our attention, and experimenting on how agents would behave just didn't seem to be the important factor.
That actually reminds me, so when I was listening to you on about the design at Stanford, I remember that you actually did a lot of computational experimentation of how to actually, whether you actually can find a solution, for example, right?
And how long it takes to find the solution. This is a real-time auction, and we knew that these computations that we were checking feasibility, these were NP-complete problems, the feasibility checking problems, and we would have, and they were being done at scale, and we had to be able to do them. We ended up doing a few thousand of them during the auction, and we needed each of them to finish within about a minute in order to be able to run the auction with a low failure rate. So I wanted a 99% success rate. You can't get 100% success rates. It's an NP-complete problem, but you might be able to get a 99% success rate. And so our objective was to get 99% done within a minute, and we pretty much achieved that objective. That was, again, that was not my work. That was mostly the work of Kevin Leighton Brown at UBC.
So in the actual implementation, the computer program managed to solve all the combinatorial problem?
No, not all. About 99%.
I see. Okay.
We needed, that's another novel thing. We needed an auction that would work even when our computations failed, right? So it was we had written a design that said, you know, okay, if I ask you, is there any feasible way to add Fuhito station to the other stations that are on the air? That's one of the steps to checking whether I can reduce his price. And if the computer can say yes, here's how you can do it. It can say no, I can prove it's impossible, or it can say, sorry, I don't know, I ran out of time, right? And what it means for this to be an NP complete problem, and I'll simplify and exaggerate just a little bit, it means that there's no chance that we would always be able to answer yes or no. And so we needed procedures for what to do when the answer was maybe.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay. So how did you use economic theory to design? What part of this mechanism is based on economic theory?
Oh, the obvious strategy proof.
Reverse auction part.
Oh yeah, the reverse auction part especially, because in the reverse auction, oh my, if you took economic theory as it existed at the time, when you asked yourself, is something strategy proof? The assumption is that that you know when you play a strategy what the outcome function is, that is how it would affect the outcome. And here, not only did you not know because it involved calculations that you couldn't do, but it involved calculations that we couldn't do either. So you weren't even sure what calculations we were going to do. So the matter of looking for economic theory that said that an auction would be strategy proof when we couldn't even characterize the outcome function, that was a breakthrough, and that was a novel, it was a breakthrough in economic theory. And we needed obvious strategy proofness for that. What we now know is obvious strategy proofness, where the procedure makes it strategy proof rather than the outcome function making it strategy proof. So it was, so we were using theory for that, and we were using, we looked at group strategy proofness, and we looked at the senses in which the outcome would be competitive. We had competitive standards that we studied. And we had computational theorems that were, we proved a lot of theorems about this design along the way.
So traditional game theory or auction theory is not sufficient to capture lots of constraints which are important in real life, like computational feasibility and obvious simplicity of auction formats. Do you think we can formalize those practical constraints in some way and derive a usable auction as the outcome of optimization problem subject to those cognitive or practical constraints? What is your view?
Yeah, well, we did do some of that, and my students are still doing more. They're this year on the job market. I don't know if you've seen Leah Nagel and Roberto Saito.
Yeah, we had them give a talk actually. Yeah.
You had them here, yeah. Isn't that incredible work, right? They're doing amazing work on what it means for certain mechanisms to be easy, or easier anyway, for how to compare how hard mechanisms are for people with limited computation ability. So yes, there's work going on, and I'm very excited to direct graduate students who are doing it.
So my view is the auction design is similar to the invention of new product like iPhone. iPhone is partly based on electronics and statistics and math. So it's partly based on theory, but it's not the outcome of optimization. And nobody criticizes iPhone because it's not the outcome of optimization, right? but the important aspect of new technology is it's going to evolve. So you invent something and somebody else comes and the technology is kept on improving. Is this something happening to auction design? So let's go back to the first FCC 1994 auction. You invented simultaneous round auction. Later, was it improved in certain ways? And could you describe possible what happens to those basic design?
So there is one thing that I think was a clear improvement is that developed into a clock auction design. That is, the auctioneer started calling prices instead of letting the bidders call prices, and that enabled a number of improvements that sped up the auction. Some of those auctions were taking too long. It's made them run faster and reduced the opportunities for strategizing by bidders. There was also some combinatorial enhancements that people debate whether these are improvements or not, but they allowed bidders who found licenses to be complements to bid for packages instead of just bidding for individual licenses. And that's been adopted and used in a number of countries, and it's still controversial, I think, but there have been some combinatorial advancements like that.
Okay. So Fuhito, do you have any additional question about the incentive auction?
No, this is wonderful. Actually, I'm more worried about the limited time that we have so many questions we want to ask. So,
I have one other thing I did want to say, because I know that you were going to ask me about, were there future uses of the incentive auction?
Yeah. Okay. So okay. So what is the future use of incentive auction?
So the broadcast incentive auction, was about changing property rights in addition to reallocating ownership.
Right. Yeah.
And I have been working with students on what we call the water incentive auction. And in which we move, at the time I was doing this, we were so focused on the technology of it that when people asked about generalizations, we were wondering whether we could use the same technology. But that's not what was really important. It turns out what was really important then is we had a bunch of property rights, namely to use parts of spectrum for broadcast television, that were incompatible with the needs of new uses, and they were it was ownership. We had to do a voluntary transition in which not everybody would agree to participate. And we now in California, I have been looking, and in the western states in the United States, I've been looking at water. The water rights that exist in California are archaic. They were set up in the 19th century when nothing could be measured, and when the uses, when use it or lose it was these are rights that if you don't use the water that's allocated to you, you lose the right in the future, which encourages waste, because you've got to make sure you use up all your water, and you can't store it because that's not counted as a use, and you can't trade it because that's not the way the rights are designed. We need major changes in water rights to improve, to deal with shortages on the Colorado River and elsewhere in California and throughout the western states. And we need it to be voluntary. And so the conception I have that relates this back to the incentive auction is how to create a voluntary process that doesn't require everybody to participate, but involves transitioning property rights to a modern system that is that's suitable for modern uses. So we want it to be that if you adopt a water-saving technology and use less water to grow your crops, that you can sell the difference and be rewarded for that. That we would like water rights that make that possible, for example. Or if you want to store water in a year when there's plenty so that you have in one of the big reservoirs so that it's available to you in a dry year, we want that to be possible. And if you want to borrow against it to improve, to have finance water saving technique, it should be a tradable asset so you can do that. We want to change the property rights, and we want to find a way to do it that's voluntary, so that people don't have to participate. And the incentive auction is a model for that. And so not the details of how we solve the NP hard problems, but the details of how we transition property rights, I think, is a really big, important idea that I hope is going to be a legacy idea for me. I mean, I'm going to try to do that.
It's very interesting. So the state of California asked you to design reallocation water, or you are just doing research?
So far, it's just research. I started this a couple of years ago because there was a crisis on the Colorado River after several years of drought, and we decided that if we could get the team I was working with, if we could put together a solution, that people would be desperate for it and we'd get a hearing. Then we had a heavy rains that year, and the problem wasn't immediate. And so we set it aside because I had some other projects I was working on. But I'm trying to get this set up so that everybody knows that we need long-term change. And as the next crisis approaches, I want to be able to go to the governor and say, we know how to solve this problem. Here's how to do it. And, and see if we can get it adopted.
That's wonderful. So we are looking forward to your new design of reallocating water rights. So let's move on to next topic. That's practical applications of market design.
Yeah.
So market design is all about designing procedure of allocating things by using economic theory. So the purpose is to sell and or buy valuable objects, or maybe the objective is to match people to organization, matching students to schools or matching doctors to hospitals. And this practice of market design is really widespread. So let me just give you some information and what we stand in Japan in this global trend of using market design. So my first piece of information is about spectrum auction. So there are lots of OECD countries, and all of them, except Japan, adopted market design approach of selling spectrum bands. And selling spectrum bands by auction rather than allocating those things to, mobile phone operators. Obvious, benefit is it helps to raise money to reduce government deficit. And I have numbers, total spectrum auction revenues between 2010 and 2021 for major countries, United States, England, Germany, and South Korea. And the total revenue is so it's all in Japanese yen, but it's about 1 trillion Japanese yen to 23 trillion yen. In contrast, the annual government deficit of Japanese government in recent years is in the order of 22 to 32 trillion yen. So if you conduct a spectrum auction, it helps a lot to reduce our government deficit, but still we are somewhat behind. So that's one application of market design. The another major application is to design procedure to match people to organizations, like match students to high schools and middle schools. So let me show you some information. In Japan, in most prefectures, students can apply to only one public high school during their admission process. It's called Tangansei. So if that is the procedure, students usually play safe meaning that many students apply to schools that would surely accept them. Right? But if that is true, sort of mismatch usually happens. So the nature of mismatch is some students could have been accepted to better schools because they played safe. So Fuhito and other people in our Market Design Center and ERATO are proposing what is called the DA algorithm. It's a computer algorithm which eliminates the possible mismatch altogether. Okay, so what was the nature of mismatch? Some students could have been accepted to better schools. So this possibility is completely eliminated if you adopt DA. Okay, so Fuhito's attempt, together with other collaborators in our Market Design Center, made a headline news. This is the leading article of Yomiuri newspaper. And we get lots of attention, so lots of pros and cons. So we are, if successful, we are going to adopt the TA for high school admission. So if you look at other countries, there are a bunch of countries which already use DA for middle school or high school admissions. So here is a list, and DA was introduced. So it includes Hungary and major cities in United States, England, Finland, and Belgium, and Holland. And we are a little bit behind. Okay, so market design has been very successful, but still we are trying to, struggling to implement practical applications. So Fuhito, you have some question?
Yes, so first of all, this is the theoretical background of this this implementation is called matching theory, and the Paul Milgrom actually is also a major contributor to that field himself. But let me actually ask something else today. Okay, so like Michi said, so we have been trying very hard to disseminate information and possibly ask policymakers to adopt our proposal. It can be a lot of work. So for example, regarding this school or matching, so Shunya and others actually wrote, Shunya is sitting there, so I think he and his friends wrote a sort of policy proposal kind of report, maybe back in like 2021, I guess. So we have been trying for like 4 years, and we finally got some actually so realistic prospect to make any change. So my question would be, well, how actually do you succeed so much? So is there any recipe for making a change, basically?
Could you share a secret of your success?
Exactly.
Well, first of all, I've been very lucky in some respects. I mean, somebody's got to be lucky. I'm glad it was me. I got some good projects. I had no experience doing market design when the first FCC auctions came along, and citations to theory literature that had absolutely nothing to do with the problem was why Pacific Bell, a telephone company, called me and I ended up getting involved. So I'd say that luck had a lot to do with that, the government didn't have anybody that knew how to run auctions. The Federal Communications Commission had never run any auctions. There was nobody there who thought they knew how to do it. There was no entrenched bureaucracy that wanted to do it in any particular way. And they were looking for ideas, and I got called in, and that was very lucky. Later on, the incentive auction, the fact that the U.S. had decided to run an auction in that setting, that's due to Evan Correll, who had worked on that for years as an insider at the Federal Communications Commission, got the government to do it, and then called me for help once the Congress. So I don't take any credit for that either. I think somebody else did that, and they called me, and I feel very lucky to have been called that way too. And now I have a reputation, so I'm getting called I'm getting some other interesting calls, and I have this idea that that there are things that nobody else knows how to do, like how to solve the water problem in California. That if I come up with an idea, I have a really good chance of getting accepted. At least that's what I think. So again, I don't really have anything more that. And I am. I guess the last thing, but I think maybe this is not telling you that much. I try to describe things in simple terms to the government too. When I'm telling them how something works, I don't try to describe how the algorithm works in any detail. I try to describe why it's simple and attractive from their perspective, and so and that's been helpful too.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So I summarize. So luck and
Reputation.
communication.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And friends. I mean, friends who is really doing good work, and reputation. That means it looks like we should write a lot of papers first. Good papers. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, so let's turn to some academic question about market design for theorist audience. So Fuhito, you might have a question about the future of market design.
Yeah, I just wonder. So this is like very, very vague question, but what is the future direction of market design? So what would be the sort of interesting topic to study?
Yeah, so there's still a lot going on in matching, as you know. I mean, you're one of the world's leading theorists about matching, and you're working on matching here. But there are other ways that markets are creating value as well. In the incentive auction, we imagined the market as a production process. That is, we imagined that we were buying broadcast rights and selling wireless data rights. And once you start thinking about there being a transformation, that it's not just matching, that we're taking some combination of sellers and selling to some combination of buyers. It's like changing iron ore into steel or something. There are lots more possibilities. So right now I'm the chairman of the scientific advisory board of One Kronos, which is a securities market. And right now it has some confidential projects I can't tell you about, but what's in the public domain is it's the fastest growing security market in the United States in 2023 and 2024. It had a 650% annual growth rate. So it's growing very fast. It's now handled over $1 trillion worth of transactions using a new transaction technology in securities markets. And we're looking at combinatorial markets where it's not just matching buyers and sellers, where we're looking at combinatorial markets for other products as well, which I will keep confidential for now.
We should wait for more research from you.
Or more practical designs too.
Exactly.
Okay, so let us move on to questions for you as a researcher and a teacher. So in this audience, there may be lots of young graduate students and undergraduate students. Maybe they would like to be a researcher, or they would like to work for real-life companies. And do you have any advice for them based on your career choice? As I remember, you had a math degree, undergraduate degree, and then you worked for insurance industry as actuary. Actuary is professionals to calculate the proper insurance rate based on statistics, right? So he is one of the earlier data scientists. And then you spent 7 years or 6 years in the insurance industry as actuary?
5 years.
5 years.
Yeah.
And so why did you try to come back to graduate study? So you wanted to be a researcher back then when you entered the GSB. Was it?
It was the GSB, but
was it doctor's program or a master's program?
I came back to get an MBA. I had no
MBA,
clue.
I see.
I had no clue that I was a researcher. I was already a researcher then. I just didn't know it. When I was working as an actuary, I published 2 papers. There were things going on that people said, well, there's no way to do this, or this is very. So I published mathematical methods to solve problems that actuaries were interested in, and I became a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. And when I was 25, I saw that I was doing the same kind of work as my 50-year-old colleagues, and I thought, okay, I've been getting new stuff every year, but it's going to get boring now. So I better go back and do something new. So I went to get an MBA, and the faculty, another luck, boy, this was very lucky. The faculty saw that I was a researcher. And I never even applied to a PhD program. What happened was they took my MBA application, and I got called in one day by some faculty, and they said, we've been paying attention to what you've been saying in class and to what you've done, and we would like to offer you admission to our PhD program, and here's a scholarship. And I thought about it for a few days and said, yeah, actually, that is who I am, isn't it? So that's what I did.
Oh, I see. That's really remarkable.
It's lucky. It's very lucky. I'm so grateful to those guys for understanding me better than I understood myself.
And your PhD thesis was about auction?
It was.
Why did you choose auction as your main topic?
Well, that's another one. Okay. So, I was admitted to this PhD program. I had no idea what I wanted to study. And the graduate student a year ahead of me, Bengt Holmstrom, I was talking to him and I said, so what am I supposed to do? How do I get into research? And he said, well, the most important thing is to get Bob Wilson to be your advisor. And I was taking a class from Bob Wilson, and we were reading various papers, and we had to prepare term papers for that class. One of the papers I read was one of his papers, and I thought, well, I'll see if for my term paper I can extend what he did. So I took a problem on a paper that he had published, and it turns out he had worked with Dave Krebs on this problem, and they had failed to extend it. And I wrote a term paper which generalized some sufficient condition he had into a necessary and sufficient condition, and he got very excited by this term paper and said, hey, you can work with me. And he says, and this paper is the main chapter of your thesis. He says, you can be finished next year. So I finished graduate school in 2.5 years.
Wow.
Remarkable.
just to remind the audience, so Bob Wilson is the other Nobel recipient with Paul in 2020. So that's a sort of long journey from then.
Yeah, it was fun.
Very beautiful.
And do you have a question about
I think,
most important?
Okay, I have more than one most important question. So which one? Okay, yes.
Very important question.
Yeah, so, well, actually, okay, let me ask I think you mostly answered this question perhaps, but then I wonder, so you have many different contributions in many different fields. So what do you think is your most important contribution, and what is legacy, intellectual legacy, so to speak?
See, the thing about me that my students always comment on is, if you ask me what's the most important thing I've ever done, it's always what I'm working on right now. It's just the way I always feel. And right now, I'm thinking the legacy I would love to leave is to do the water incentive auction, and to have done to have created a method. So when I was an undergraduate in mathematics, we used to say, if you solve a problem, a certain way once, it's a trick. But if you solve it twice, it's a method. If you use it twice, use it once, it's a trick. If you use it twice, it's a method. So we have had an incentive auction once that reallocated property rights for radio spectrum. If we have another incentive auction, appropriately adapted, that reallocates rights to water and works equally well, that will be my legacy. An incentive auction, a way to take archaic property rights that are not suitable for the modern era and change them in a way that actually works and is voluntary to something that is suitable for the modern era.
Okay, thank you. And we actually collected some questions from the audience.
Oh, good.
And there are too many of them, so we can ask only two of them. And the first question is, what impact does AI have on market design research and its practical application? Do you have any view about? Everybody asks this kind of question.
Yes,
nowadays.
everybody asks it. So I could ask back to the person, what is AI, right? Yes, so much in it. Yeah, so, you know, AI has a lot in it. I mean, really, some of it is about data analysis, and some of it is there are new optimization techniques, these stochastic gradient descent techniques that they use for training algorithms. So different aspects of it have different uses. When we are solving combinatorial optimizations, as we did in the incentive auction, as I think we need to do in the water auction as well, some of the optimization techniques that are used there by AI might be useful. I've had various uses of AI outside of, or large language models anyway, outside of mechanism design, but there are some fantastic uses. Some of your students that I was talking to this afternoon have some fantastic uses of stochastic gradient descent, AI, machine learning kinds of methods to solve economic problems, and you know, we'll see what comes of all of that.
Okay, thank you. And would
very
you like to
encouraging.
ask the
Thank you.
next question from the audience?
Yes, so this is probably the last question, right? So this is the last question, but actually this is exactly
not
what...
the last one, but
Okay,
this is,
okay, can we have maybe one or two or more, three or something? Okay, great. So let me ask the question. So like I said, so many of people in this audience, both here and online, so they are students. So we always wanted to know, how do you come up with new research ideas? Give me the secret.
Oh, goodness. I really don't have an answer to that question. How do you come up with new ideas? You know, you're curious, you listen, you focus on problems, you listen. People, one of the things that happens a lot, I guess, is when I hear people making arguments, I hear implicit assumptions all the time. Say, how did they get from here to there? You know, they must be assuming X. Is X true? What happens if it's not true? I find that's those kinds of thoughts going through my mind a lot, and maybe that's part of it. I don't really know what it is, but certainly being curious and challenging incomplete arguments is part of what I do.
I actually remember that one day on the lunchtime you said you actually whenever you use math theorems, you actually show it by yourself. So that's I now remember this. So
Yeah.
you definitely like nail down all the arguments, right? So that sounds really important.
Yeah.
Thank you.
okay. So we have two more questions. So among the audience, we have some business people and policy makers. And could you give them some words about the usefulness of basic theoretical research to make our society a better place to live in? So for practical people, business people, and policy people, what's the value of basic theoretical research?
Right. It has value alongside of a lot of things that have value, but I think the basic theoretical research, you know, gives you you do things that are abstract. You get deeper insight into problems, and sometimes you find opportunities to do things better. And sometimes it gives you an insight of how to solve a problem that nobody has any idea how to solve. And the kinds of the applications that I'm talking about well, certainly these incentive auction applications, for example, but all these auction applications actually involved having theoretical insights from having done theoretical research and then finding that they were useful for some problems or created opportunities, in the one Kronos case, to create new markets. So it prepares you to solve things that are important. So that's why.
Thank you. The last question. So among the audience, there are lots of graduate students and even undergraduate students, and many of them would like to be a researcher. And if you pick up any one of them, not the best one, just ordinary one, they have aspirations. And they have one thing in common, one common aspiration. One day I will get the Nobel Prize, right? And you, the dream came true for you. So could you give them some words, what they should do if they try to invent something really revolutionary and eventually leads to Nobel Prize?
Yeah, you don't go about trying to win a prize. You go about trying to do great work. I think there's a lot of luck involved. There's judgment. There's a bunch of Swedes on the committee that decided they liked my work better than other people of similar caliber. I feel very fortunate, and I've had a lot of good stuff happen to me. I know my work is good. I work hard to make it good. And but I don't really think much about prizes. I just hope to do the best work I can.
Okay, that's a very good advice. Okay, so thank you very much, Paul, and thank you very much. So please put your hands together for Paul Milgrom.
Thank you very much. We had such interesting, insightful, beautiful discussions, and we learned a lot. So let's give a big round of applause again for Professor Milgrom, Professor Kandori, and Professor Kojima. Thank you. Now we would like to conclude this symposium. Thank you very much for your participation. 本日はご参加いただきありがとうございます。受付にてレシーバーのご返却をお願いします。それではありがとうございました。